Welcome to Best in Class. I'm AJ Madden. I have the honor and privilege of helping individuals and organizations become best in class at what they do. Today, I'd like to welcome someone who has had a major positive impact on both my life and career, my friend and great mentor, Dr. Alan Weiss. Alan has been called the finest entrepreneurial coach in the world by Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. His past clients include Merck, Hewlett-Packard, GE, Mercedes-Benz, the Federal Reserve, the New York Times Corporation, Toyota, and over 500 leading organizations. Alan has a PhD in psychology and is also an inductee into the Professional Speaking Hall of Fame. He has written over 500 articles and 60 books, including his bestseller, Million Dollar Consulting, now in its 30th year and 6th edition. His career has taken him to 60 states, 60 countries, and 49 states. He is the lifetime recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award of the American Press Institute, the first ever for a non-journalist. Alan is married to the lovely Maria, and they have two children and twin granddaughters. They reside in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, with their dogs Coco and Bentley, a white German Shepherd. Alan, welcome back to Best in Class.
Thanks, AJ. Before I get into trouble, we actually have four grandchildren now. My son has two very young ones. So I just want to make the record clear.
Oh, excellent, excellent. I should have asked you that before the call if we had to add anything. Well, great. Well, congrats on that. Two more grandkids. It's a beautiful thing. So, this is my experience. Alan is irrefutably the Michael Jordan of the consulting world. But I believe that Alan is truly a world class expert in three key areas that apply to all of us: business slash career, leadership, and living a good life. Now, Alan recently did an incredible interview for the podcast Julius Asks, which I'll put a link to in the description below. I think it's a must listen interview. The host asked Alan, what insights have CEOs and executives paid you hundreds of thousands of dollars for? And Alan gave some really, really interesting answers. So in today's interview, Alan's going to expand on some of those insights. And here's insight number one that CEOs have paid Alan hundreds of thousands of dollars for. Insight number one: stop doing that. Alan, can you tell us about that?
I think that over the course of my career, I've met a lot of great CEOs, and I happen to think that most top executives deserve to be where they are. I don't believe people are damaged. I believe most of them are good. They have good intention. There are exceptions, of course, but what I found is that you get sort of a hero complex, and you think you can solve anything and improve anything, and wave a magic wand, and poor performers become all stars. It doesn't work that way. In addition, some things have to just be abandoned. So, I'll give you you mentioned Merck is one of the companies I worked for. I worked for them for 12 years as a consultant. And at one point, Merck, like every pharmaceutical firm, and I had six pharmaceutical clients at once at one point. And contrary to popular belief, that's not unethical or illegal or anything else, as long as everybody knows what's going on. Uh, they would pitch to doctors, and they'd pitch to clinics, and they'd pitch to hospitals. And so their drugs were presented to these kinds of buyers. And of course, at the time, doctors were taken for quote unquote business trips, pharmaceutical research trips or something to the Caribbean, and they would put up in nice hotels and resorts and everything else. And that was the business, the business meeting. And Merck Salesforce every year got the award for best pharmaceutical Salesforce every year, all stars.
Mm.
And then one year something happened. And what happened was government regulations changed. They cut down on these private trips and so forth and so on. And suddenly the pharmaceutical companies were selling to the procurement people down in the basement. And that was a huge difference because the procurement people were paid to get the best price they could.
Mm.
And they weren't taken on vacations, they weren't taken on junkets. And so Merck had to change its ways, as did the other pharmaceutical companies, fairly abruptly. And you could not have a CEO who said, listen, we made our sales force the best there is. It's feet on the street, and that's how we're going to do this. Now, at the time, Roy Vagelos, who came out of the National Institute of Health, was Merck's CEO, one of the best I have ever seen or worked with. I mean, superb. And he recognized quite rapidly that they had to make a radical right-hand turn here. They had to change the way that they were promoting and selling their drugs. And if you extrapolate that and look forward, what are drug companies doing today? They're selling to the end user. And so you can't watch a TV show without Ozempic or whatever, Keytruda, you name it, these strange names, being promoted to the end user so they can go to their doctor and say, what about this drug? So that whole landscape has changed, and you have to help CEOs understand that despite their powers and despite their courage and despite their everything, you got to adjust to the times. And so you got to stop doing that. I've met a lot of CEOs who wanted to save everyone, who never wanted to fire anybody. But the thing is, if you want to be an effective leader, and you mentioned that before as one of these three key things, if you want to be an effective leader, you have to make tough decisions, and tough decisions include firing people. Because if you don't make the tough decisions as a top person, nobody will.
Mm, okay. Well, what I found is that, all of Alan's answers that he's given already and it gave in the other podcasts don't just apply to being a great consultant or CEO, but they're also life principles in terms of sometimes you have to fire people in your life who are not working, who are mistreating you, or or for other reasons. And that was actually, Alan, from the list. The second piece of advice was fire her, which you essentially explained before. Can you just maybe explain that? Fire her, making those tough decisions and how and why to make them.
Well, I work for a firm in Chicago. I won't name this firm, but uh, the person who took over as president had been the executive vice president of a division of a competitor. They hired him to be president, change the company, improve it, make it move it from number three to number one, and so forth. And he had tremendous problems with his human resource person who had been there for 30 or 35 years and was not fast in providing answers. At one point, I am not making this up, didn't know how many people worked for the company. And she said, well, it's hard to tell. People come and go. So he put up with this and put up with it. He tried to give a counseling. He sent to the courses and everything else. And I finally said to him, just fire her. She's not working out. Give her a great severance package. But think about how much she's hurting your business. I mean, you're just complaining to me about the things you know. What you don't know, as I sniffed around, is that various departments aren't getting the proper resources, people aren't getting the right counseling, and so forth and so on. The training she brings in has nothing to do with your succession planning, for example. So it's like building a bridge over a river, but the two sides don't meet when they get up there. So sometimes you have to say, and this is, AJ, this is honest to God truth. When you've got a real problem employee who just can't hack it, either because of attitude or skill, and they can't be improved, when you fire them, you're doing them a favor because they have become a pariah. They're not effective. People know it. They don't feel good about themselves. Move them out. It helps everybody. And, that's tough advice to give, and it's a tough decision to make. But if we don't do that, who does it?
Mm, that's right. Well said. I mean, I found that 100% true in my 20 years in entrepreneurship and business. Exactly what you just said there. And people get in their own way in terms of, I've heard you say this, leaders think they have to save everybody and be a savior, correct? Some do.
I worked for a large um, swimming pool installation company. And other things I was doing, I learned that the president and the head of R&D were absolutely at odds. They didn't like each other. R&D was actually in the basement and had a bunker mentality of all things. And the R&D vice president was hidden away in there. And it was horrible. And everybody, knew about it, and they couldn't get new products commercialized fast and so forth. So I said to the president, you got to fire him. And he said, yeah, there'll be lawsuits. He said, there'll be recriminations. People will take sides. I said, no, no, no. If I can go down there and get him to accept a severance package that looks like this, and I sketched it out, would you accept it and prove it? He said, you'll never get him to accept that. I said, if I do, would you do it? He said, absolutely. So I go down there and I said, listen, you're miserable, right? He said, yeah, I'm miserable, and it's his fault. I said, okay, let's not talk about fault. I don't think this can ever be retrieved here. This cannot be corrected. But if I got you this severance package I put in front of him, I said, would you agree to sign it? He said, I would never get that. I said, if I gave it to you, would you sign it? He says, yeah, sure. So I went back up to the president. This only took about 2 hours. And I said, God, he will sign this. He said, I said, he'll sign this. So president calls his human resource person, and this is a different company, not the one I mentioned before, of course. And she says, of course, well, this isn't within our rules. We can't create this for him. And the
Mm.
president says, put it together. So she does. He signs it. I go downstairs. The other guy signs it. And I said, in the rest of the day, clean out your stuff, and we'll handle what has to be handled. So 6 months go by. He's got a new R&D president, new R&D vice president. And somebody says, I saw the old guy in the supermarket. He lost about 20 pounds. He's got this great tan. And he had been widowed. He said, and he has a new wife. He said, he looks great and he's happy as hell. And that's often what happens. You're alleviating misery. I think going back to your original question, that a lot of executives, because they're so successful, feel that they're really the heroes. They should wear a cape and show everybody how to fly over tall buildings. But the real essence of a heroic leader is being willing to make unpopular and tough decisions.
Oh, well said. Well, that's one of the most important things that's been said on this podcast this year. What a heroic leader is. That's crucial. And two observations. Number one, this is that story is why you are the best in the business to make that happen, where both parties won. And I think that's what an exceptional leader does. They create win-win situations, and that's what you help that leader do. Everybody won there. And you did it in a way that everyone also kept their dignity, which is crucial. So you can make these hard decisions in a way that you can do your best to create a win-win, and in a way that lets people create their dignity. And both parties ended up way better off for it. Again, crucial skill set for leaders to create those win-wins and be creative to do it and just make it happen. I mean, you were relentless with both parties to make it happen. And you have to be tenacious like that. Advice
I
number
was with
three.
if I just add something, AJ, I was with another guy. He was vice president of strategy, another company. And the president said, he's driving me crazy. He blames everybody. He won't take accountability. We don't really have a comprehensive or cohesive strategy. He says, and what do you think? I said, I think you ought to fire him. Here's the evidence. And he said to me, yeah, me too. He said, look, do me a favor, have one more meeting with him and see if he sees the light. So we had lunch in the executive dining room away from everybody else. And I said, Steve, you're in big trouble here. And if you don't stop with the politics and blaming other people, you're going to be fired. He says, I can never be fired here. I said, you will be fired. He says, what makes you think that? I said, because I'm having lunch with you. And his eyes got large for a minute. And then he said, psh. And, I told the president, I can do no more. I said, I have accountability, but only you have authority. A week later, he was gone.
Oh, I see. So essentially, you're saying only coach the coachable, as you and your good friend Marshall Goldsmith talk about. Only coach the coachable.
When Marshall and I wrote Life Storming together, obviously we agreed on a lot of things independently we brought to the book. But one of the most important things we had agreed on, the two of us, because he primarily coached in organizations, executives, and I primarily coach entrepreneurs, as you said, is that if somebody doesn't want to be helped, get away from them. If somebody can't do something by themselves, let's say in 30 days, they're not going to be able to do it without outside help. And if they get outside help, like one of the two of us or somebody else, if they still can't do it in 90 days, they need to find something else to do. And we spend too much time trying to help people who can't be helped because they don't want to be helped.
Mm. And that right there is $100,000, $1 million advice easily.
Listen, there was this great guy. I went out to his place once in Arizona named Bob Mager, and Bob Mager was a training guru. He wrote a book called You Really Ought to Wanna, and things like that. And he had this interesting chart about how you improve people. And one of the questions was, and because it's a little bit awkward in this day and age, but his question was, if I put a gun to his head, could he do it? And his point was, if the person said, okay, take the gun away, I can do it, that's an attitude problem. But if the person said, shoot me, I can't do this, that's a skills problem. And his point was that you educate with a skills problem. You train, you educate, you improve. With an attitude problem, you have to coach. But you can't coach for a skills problem, and you can't train for an attitude problem. And Mager was right. And that's what we all have to understand.
Advice number three, let up. Not everything needs the same amount of attention, pressure, or focus. And you really need to focus on what's important and make the priorities priorities. So can you help us do that better?
Well, you have to understand what you control and what you don't control. And you have to understand that if you spend a lot of time trying to influence things you can't control, you're going to burn up your energy. You're going to create a lot of heat, but not much light. And so, people are debating all over the place right now the tariffs as we speak, which are in effect, which might not stay in effect, which might stay in effect. But the fact is that they ought to be spending their time on improving their business, on improving their health, on improving their relationships, on improving their brand, and so forth. Because uh, no matter what the economy, no matter how bad things have been, and whether it was 9/11 or the recession or the pandemic, you name it, there are always organizations that need help, that are doing well, that are willing to pay for value, always. And that's our job, to help organizations and individuals improve. So we have to recognize the difference. And we have to think about uh, how we can make that happen for people, but with a positive attitude. And you said it before, where it's a win-win kind of endeavor. You know, well, I think one of the problems we're seeing today in sort of government relationships is a win-lose endeavor. In other words, it's not good enough that I win; you have to lose, and that's why we have polarization. But if you
Mm.
look at a win-win attitude, which Marshall certainly promotes, and I do too, it might not be perfect for each of us. We might have to concede some things, but we're better off. And so you give that guy a better departure package than you have to or you're mandated to, but you put more money in there. And he gives in on some of his animosity and says, okay, I'm going to leave the security of my bunker down here and I'm going to get out, but I'll feel better. I'll be better off. You have to create where people feel that they're better off. And in all of my books, I remark that um, our job as consultants is to improve the client's condition. The client has to feel better off after we leave. Not perfect, not necessarily on top of the hill, but better off than before. So the physicians say, first, do no harm. I'm saying something beyond that. It's not good enough that you don't harm the client. You have to improve the client's condition.
Mm. Oh, well said. And that makes you insanely valuable to any organization, whether you are a consultant, a CEO, a team member. If you can just relentlessly improve the condition and add value, it just makes you insanely valuable. Now, if you're finding this advice useful so far, as I am, as always, Alan has a new tool called Alan Intelligence. Now, I've been fortunate to get Alan's Intelligence now for years firsthand, so I can tell you that it is, it's been very valuable to me personally and professionally. But he also has an AI tool now. Alan, do you want to talk about that a little bit, and then we can keep going through your best advice?
Well, you have to stay sort of on the leading edge of things. And I wanted to see, people think AI will take over the world. That's not going to happen. But
Mm.
it has tremendous uses if we use it as a tool. And just coincidentally, AI stands for Allen Intelligence. So I've trademarked it. And on my site now, you can purchase a
It's a
life.
great name.
Yeah,
Great
thanks.
name.
On alanweiss.com, you can purchase a lifetime membership, and your lifetime, not mine. And you can ask it any question. You can say to it, I have a meeting tomorrow with this person. How do I tell if he or she is a buyer? I have to put a book proposal together. What should it look like? I have to put a proposal together for coaching services. What should I include? What should I omit? And on and on and on. It could say, I have to meet the board. What do I say to a board? I've never done it before. And you will get a narrative answer in my words. You will get resources that are text, audio, and video as they apply, and all downloadable. And there are two options. If you choose the slightly higher option, the library option, it will actually take you to one of my books or more that are relevant, and it'll take you to page 36 and say, this is the paragraph you need. So it's a real-time tool where you can ask it what you do as soon as you walk out of a meeting, before you go into the meeting, when you're about to take a phone call, how to improve your proposals overall. There's no limit to it, and it can answer in any language.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I opted for even though again I've had the privilege of learning from Alan for years, I opted for the library option because I can go back and have further tools to learn because Alan's written what over 60 books, or probably over 70 now at this point, correct?
Well, if you count successive editions, yeah. And when I write a fourth or fifth or sixth edition, it's really a new book. So yeah.
So that's a ton of added value, just for a little bit more to get the library edition. There's just further learning tools there. Now, I mean, this applies. I mean, even if you're a CEO or executive or entrepreneur, this is a great tool because, again, Alan's the $1 million consultant, but really he's an expert on leadership and business as well as life. So you don't have to be a consultant to get great use out of one, his books, two, his coaching, or three, AI. Because I often ask myself, as I'm going through my work as an entrepreneur consultant, what would Alan do? Okay, what would Alan tell me to do? And this is you have that at your fingertips, at a very low price, compared to his one-on-one clients as well, which I also highly recommend. I've always gotten at least a 10x return on every engagement I've done with Alan, and I've done some of the top tier engagements with Alan. So that's also worth it as well to get the one-on-one coaching. I think the AI is a great either supplement or just straight up tool to that. So let's see, Alan, in terms of prioritization, you talk about that. What are some tips in terms of setting priorities or simplifying, such as Occam's razor? How do we get there fastest and easiest? These are some of my favorite pieces of advice I've gotten from you over the years.
Well, I'm a reductionist, so I want to make things as simple as possible. I think too many consultants try to make things complex because they think it's worth more if it's complex. They think it's more sophisticated if it's complex. I don't. I think that the simpler you make things, the more likely it is that people will adhere to it and follow it and believe in it. So, being a reductionist, I try to understand what's going on, and I ask myself, how effectively and how quickly can I solve this? And effectively doesn't mean perfectly. It means I'm improving the client's condition. And that might mean saving money, it might mean saving time, it might mean avoiding conflict and so forth. So I like to look for the easiest path, and I like to present it as such because that does not minimize the value. The value is in what you create. The value is in the improvement or the opportunity or the problem that's solved. That's where the value is. So whether it takes you 5 minutes or 5 days, the solution is just as valuable.
Mm. Oh, I love it. I love it. How do we get there fastest and easiest, as you
You use
say?
process. Yeah, you use processes. In other words, I'm a process consultant. You know, Edgar Schein wrote a book called Process Consultation. I wrote a book called Process Consulting. I mean, this is nothing new, but see. I can work in any industry. I can work in for-profits, nonprofits, global companies, domestic companies. I can work in any kind of operation because I use processes. So I see things in patterns, and I also know what's not there. Sherlock Holmes. There's a Sherlock Holmes story, and there's a murder at night, and Watson says to Holmes, "Yeah, but the dog didn't bark. Nobody came." And Holmes says, "No, somebody came, but the dog knew him, and
Mm.
that's why he didn't bark." Now, I mean, that's great detective work, and it's also great consulting work.
Mm.
Um, one time, my wife was afraid she was having a heart problem. It was 2 in the morning, and so I drove her over to the emergency room here, and they rushed her into the emergency area. I sat down next to her bed, and the doctor came in. The nurses were around. The doctor came in, and the doctor asked her about 10 or 12 questions. And he looked at the results of the stuff, and he said to her and me, he said, "You're fine. It might have been a little bit of a panic attack." He said, "But there's nothing wrong with you. We'll keep you overnight for observation." And I said to him, "Doctor, you know something? You asked her the same questions that I ask my clients.
Mm.
You asked, how long has this been happening? Does it get better or worse? When did you first notice it? And so forth." He said to me without hesitating, "That's because you and I are both diagnosticians." And so, being a process consultant, I look to diagnose what's going on. And that's why I never sit down in a buyer's office like a lot of consultants do and say, "Well, it's the buyer. He's the problem. She's the problem." And because they might have heard some things like schoolyard gossip and so forth. But if the
Mm.
buyer's smart enough to ask you to come in, I don't want to start with the fact that the buyer's stupid. Uh,
Mm.
and so I apply these processes, and I learn whether the problem's about procedures, or it's about people, or it's about outside forces like vendors and so forth.
Mm.
And I recommend quick and easy solutions, and that's what people will most committedly follow because it's easy to do that.
Oh, that's such an important point there. They're quick and they're easy to follow. Dr. Price Pritchett maybe number one in the world in merger integration, says put the cookies on the bottom shelf for people, meaning make it easy for people to execute and do. Crucial. But that's a master, though, because a master makes the complex simple for people to understand and do. And that's what you're talking about.
I can't tell you how many times I ask my coaching clients, stop. What is your question? Because they say, I'll have a question for you. And they go into this narration. And what they're doing is they're making their cognitive processes apparent. They're articulating their cognitive processes as a form of review for themselves, but it doesn't help. They might think it helps them to review, but it doesn't help the person listening. And so I just say, articulate a question for me. I don't want to know why you're here and how you got here. What's your question? Well, my question is that my clients they keep ghosting me. We agreed to speak and they don't. And I'll say to them, is it just once in a while or is it most of the time? They say it's most of the time. So well, I got news for you. You're the problem because you're the only commonality with those diverse clients. Now, if it
Right.
happens once every 2 or 3 months, that's a one-off. But if it happens consistently, it's like people say to me, my prospects always want deals. That's because you're giving off deal vibes. And so you have to look to yourself first and correct the easiest possible thing.
Mm. Well said. That's right. That's right. And I can tell you that Alan has beat it out of me in our sessions to just get to the point and ask the questions, which is honestly what was worth the price of admission alone, because that's a really important skill. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but I'm much better. It's simplifying and getting to the point, ask the question, just say what you need to say. One of the most important skills I believe in time management is to simplify your thinking down, get clear, get to the point, and also challenge others to do the same. It's a very functional, practical skill to have. Okay, this might be my favorite piece of advice on the whole list here. Health and then family and then business in that order. Can you talk about that?
Well, it's the oxygen mask principle. You can't help others unless you help yourself. I mean, that's why the airlines tell you that. It's absolutely true. And so you have to be physically healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy if you're going to be able to help others. For example, there are three kinds of empathy. There's experiential empathy, meaning you've been through it personally. There's emotional empathy, meaning that you can feel what other people are feeling. And then there's intellectual empathy, which means you understand why something has to be done. And so that's a healthy way to interact with people. So physically and intellectually and emotionally, you need to be healthy. Then you have to make sure that your family is doing well. And that doesn't mean bailing them out. If your kids are in trouble, it means teaching your kids a lesson, but it does mean making sure that your family has the basis of what they need to be healthy and to enjoy each other and what time we have and so forth. And after that, you can get down to business because now your personal life is in good shape. And as I've coached thousands of people, either executives or consultants and entrepreneurs, the two things that kill them are poor relationships at home and money problems. And obviously those are intertwined. And so you have to take care of your financial problems, you have to take care of your relationship issues, and then you can provide your true focus onto your business.
Oh, well said. Well said. I love that when you were talking about health initially, also that you talked about emotional health. So it's not just the physical health, it's your mental health as well to prioritize that. Because if those two things aren't good, we can't take care of our relationships or our work.
Look, when you see somebody cut somebody off on the road, we call it road rage. Unfortunately, a lot of people go through life with life rage. They feel that they've been treated poorly. They don't feel they have enough control of things. They feel they always need permission for things, and their lives are miserable. And it builds up tremendous stress and illness. Stress is a major cause of illness. And so you have to have a life that's fulfilling and is positive. And you can't go through life with life rage. Um, my wife and I were going into Providence the other day here. It's about a 15-minute trip. And we're on I-95, the major highway. And a bus pulls to within about 5 yards of my car, a bus, and it's tailgating me like that. So I said to my wife, get the number. And I motioned for the bus to pass me. I was in the second to right lane. I wasn't in the high speed lane.
Mm.
And the bus wouldn't pass me. I noticed the driver looked impaired at this stage. The driver took her hands off the wheel, was clapping. It was crazy.
Oh,
we got the number. I took a picture through the windshield when I let the bus finally pass me. And I called the bus company. I called the Department of Transportation for the state. And I said, look, you got a problem here and I want to help you. Because if this driver's impaired on a regular basis, you're going to have a lawsuit that's going to kill you.
Mm.
And so they said they were very appreciative. They immediately, within an hour, they told me they found the bus, they found the driver. And they said, we'll let you know what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks. And I don't blame them. They got legal things to go through. But I didn't try to retaliate against this bus, you know? Uh, I mean, my car is 3 tons. This bus must be 12 tons. What am I going to do?
Mhm.
Uh, and I didn't make obscene gestures, and I didn't do stupid things. But I did do something which made me feel responsible and said to me, you've taken care of it. I have closure, I've taken care of it. So people need the kind of emotional health that allows them to deal with the vicissitudes of life and the things they really can't control, like the stock market right now,
Right.
and understand that as long as they control what they can and they identify it, they're going to be better off. So that's why emotional health is so important, because it creates physical disease, and vice versa. If you're not healthy physically, emotionally, you might well have some problems. So these things are all integrated, they're all related to each other.
Well said. They're all integrated. They're not separate. They're
No, I mean, it's hard. I mean, there are people with physical problems who remain positive. I'll grant you that. But there are people who can have a hangnail or a cold and immediately feel, well, I don't have a cold, it's COVID. And then I'm going to get long COVID and I'm going to die. And that just, that ruins their entire lives. There are people who um, are paranoid about things that happen to them. And you can't go through life that way. I believe that anybody who believes in really ludicrous conspiracies is basically paranoid, and they feed into each other. There's dark money, there's deep this. They're keeping secrets. The United States, I'll speak just for our country, couldn't keep the secrets of the atomic bomb. The Russians stole them. We can't keep secrets, and so I doubt we're involved in some deep conspiracy.
that's logical. Yeah, logic's a good antidote to fear, unreasonable fear.
Yeah, and that means you have to surround yourself with logical people, with logical friends. And one of the things Marshall and I wrote about was that if you want to move from scarcity to abundance, it's not just about money. It's about how you spend your time, what you contribute to, what you believe in. And it's also about who your friends are. Because as you progress in life, it's fine to keep childhood friends. Marshall and I both have them, but you have to develop new friends along the way who are peers emotionally and successfully of where you're going. If you just keep your old friends and never develop new ones, they pull you down. And so we can't be afraid to develop new friends and new habits while still retaining some of the old ones. But if all we have are the old ones, we're never going to allow ourselves to grow.
Mm. Oh, great advice. Great advice. And as I was listening today, I'm just trying to, compartmentalize some of these tips in terms of mental health. And I heard one was just take responsibility for your situation. Two was you choose the response. You choose to respond how you did to the bus driver who was tailgating you or the tariffs. All right. And number three, just take some action that will make you feel better, that you feel you're making progress. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, and I would either add one or maybe this summarizes some of the ones you mentioned, but we have to take accountability. We have to stop blaming everyone else.
Mm.
And we have to understand there are a lot of things in our control that either we don't take advantage of or we don't believe are in our control. And we need to exert accountability in our lives and on the job. And when you start to blame people all the time, not only are you abdicating responsibility, but you're damaging yourself because you become helpless.
Mm. Oh, excellent. Next piece of $100,000 advice, giving people honest and candid feedback. These high impact leaders, entrepreneurs, it was worth it for them just to get honest and candid feedback.
That's
Can you
true.
talk about that, why that's so important? Mm.
Well, they're not generally getting it within their organizations, whether it's for profit, nonprofit, doesn't matter, because people feel they're doing them a favor by shielding them from certain things. And so the intent is good, but the result is poor. And if you keep shielding excellent people, excellent leaders, keep shielding them, and they don't realize it, they're not going to be able to operate uh, within their best capacity because they don't know what they don't know. I'll give you an example. I worked for a couple of years for State Street Bank, which is one of the largest banks in the country. It's headquartered up here in Boston. They're a large custodian of stock, of securities and so forth, even for other banks. Uh, Very profitable operation, very good people. And years ago, the CEO was a guy named Marsh Carter. He was a Vietnam War veteran officer, fabulously successful guy. And I had done a lot of projects for State Street, and they said, okay, this one is a global project. They had offices all over the world. And now, whatever this was 15 years ago, it was $350,000. That was my proposal for at the option three. I don't know what that would be worth today, but it was 350 back then, third of a million. And they said, well, Marsh Carter has to decide on this personally. So I walk in there to his office, which is, his office is the side of a house, for God's sake, and there's all memorabilia and paintings, and it's a lovely place. And I sit down across this huge desk, and he says to me, so you're the consultant? I said, yes, I am. I had never met him. And he says, over the last 5 years, under my watch, we've had 22% annual compound growth. Why should we hire you? Now, I had 3 seconds, AJ, because if I had said something, well, Mr. Carter, you've done a great job, I'm out of there. So I got $250,000 and I got about 3 seconds. And he says, why should we hire you? And I said to him, how do you know it shouldn't have been 34%? And he stared at me for what seemed an eternity. It was probably 10 seconds. And he said, you're hired, get out. And so, see, when he said under my watch, this is a guy who wanted to leave a legacy and realized despite his success, it might have been still more. And so that was attractive to him. So you can't go in as a supplicant. You can't go in obsequiously. You can't go in as though you're trying to be an employee, even though you're an outsider. You have to go in as a peer, and you have to provide feedback that the leader normally doesn't hear. And I bet nobody in that company ever said to him, Marsh, 22% was awfully good. You think you could have done better? I don't think anybody said that to him. I did.
Right. That's right. And everyone listening or watching right now, I want you to ask yourself, could you have done that, what Alan did there? Yes or no? It's a very binary question. Yes or no? Could you have done what Alan did there? And if the answer is yes, excellent, congratulate yourself. You've got healthy self-esteem and the courage of your talent, as Alan would say. If the answer is no, you have to ask yourself, what would hold you back from doing that? Is it your expertise or your self-esteem? Alan, can you give people advice who the answer is no? They wouldn't have said that with the necessary level of expertise.
It's all about self-esteem. I will grant that most people are really good at what they do, but they're not good at conveying it to others and selling it. They're good once it's implemented. They're good in terms of talking about their specialties. But I've got 2 book deals right now, 2 new book deals with Wiley. And I've just started one. It's called 7-Figure Consulting. But the book I want to write, and I've got this proposal out elsewhere, is something called The Courage of Your Talent. And I think there's a self-esteem crisis. And it was bad before, but post-pandemic, it's gone like this. And now with polarization, it's worse. And people don't feel that they're good enough or strong enough or appreciated enough. And esteem kills people. I mean, you have to walk into an office as a peer of the buyer. And if it's not a buyer you're meeting with, you have to say, fine, how can you introduce me to the buyer? Last thing in the world you want to do is sit around and chat with human resources for 2 years because they can only say no. They can't say yes. Get out of there. So if you're not capable of building up your own self-esteem, find somebody who can help you do it. If it's coachable, if it's on the surface, a good coach can do it. If it's deep inside from something your father, your mother told you 30 years ago, get therapeutic help. Because I see this all the time. People who simply will not pound a table or confront an objection or say to someone, you're doing this wrong. And as a result, they get worse and worse because if you go to a meeting, a speakers association meeting or something like this, Toastmasters, Somebody gets up and presents, and everybody says, "You were great. My God, you're terrific." But they're not. And since they're not told what they did incorrectly or not enough of, they don't understand how to improve it. So it's deleterious to the person you're supposed to try to help. And the same thing with executives. If they refuse to hear things, which some of them do, but more common, if they can't hear things because people aren't telling them, how the hell can they improve? So AI is not taking over the consulting profession, which people are talking about. You know, high tech, high touch. We're the high touch. I use high tech AI, but basically, I'm the high touch that makes the difference.
Well said. And essentially, I mean, one of the key ways to improve your self-esteem is to get a coach, get an expert guide who can help you do that, as long as it's not a traumatic issue or something from the past. In that case, I love that you said get a therapist, but there's one great tip in terms of improving self-esteem. Get a coach, get that expert feedback. Can you give us one or two more of your favorite tips? Because you're a real
Well,
expert in this. I know this.
let's just pick up on coaching. And that is, coaching should last for 90 days at the most. Uh, because after that is codependency. After that, you either can't help this person because they don't want to be helped or can't be helped, or it's codependency. Advisory work, which is different from coaching, that can last forever because you're a sounding board.
Right.
So I think you have to not only be honest in your feedback as a coach, you have to be honest about the capacity in which you're providing help. And that's very important. So people in my what they call my coaching programs or mentoring programs, I'm actually advising. I mean, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Uh, they'll come to me with a situation, and I'll tell them, "Well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that?" But if they keep coming to me with the same situation, meaning they're not applying the learning and they want me to do the work, that's not going to happen.
Right.
So I think that unless you see yourself as a peer of the person you're trying to help, and unless you see yourself as someone quite capable of providing the help, and as someone who's not supposed to be a lecturer or the fount of knowledge, but rather someone who engages in conversation, not presentation, conversation to help people improve, you're going to be tremendously valuable. But I'll say one more thing. If you're stuck in a billing mentality of billing by the hour or the day or the time unit, you can never be those people because you have an ethical conflict. And the ethical conflict is every client deserves quick help. That's why I say speed. But if you're working by a time unit, you're not going to get much money unless you spread this out. So you're in an ethical conflict with your buyer, and you need to change your billing habit.
Mm. Well said. And you've written extensively about that in Value Based Fees, one of my favorite books. I think every entrepreneur, business owner, consultant needs to read that one to understand exactly what Marshall Allen is saying here about value based fees. Now, and just adding value in general, charging for value. Now, you've talked about this. I mean, this is one of the reasons why CEOs pay you $100,000. It's that direct feedback. Can you talk about the importance of coaching? I mean, Tom Brady had a coach. All these greats had a coach. Why should people get a coach?
Well, I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. The fact is, as people become stars, they realize the value of getting continual coaching because, see, best practices is really fraudulent. What you want are better practices because best practices assumes a plateau, and when you reach it, there's nothing beyond it. Better practices says you can always improve. So Tom Brady, had a coach about, maybe his passing form, and Tiger Woods about his swing, Sinatra about voice, Streisand about voice. And so if you look at entertainers or you look at actors or you look at performers of any kind, people who have really hit it big, they have believed in coaching with rare exception. They have believed in coaching. And the coaching isn't always formal. Sometimes it's informal. A quick story. When Sinatra was at his height, Vic Damone, a great singer, was declining somewhat. So in Vegas, they moved Damone out of the major stages and they put him in the lounge. And when Sinatra's show would end around 11 o'clock or midnight, he'd say to his entourage, "Let's go over to the lounge and hear Damone and get some singing lessons." Because he felt Damone had the best pipes in the business and his phrasing was excellent. And he wanted to understand how that was happening. So we're not narrowly defined as people who need to hire a coach. We are people who could find coaching and watching what others do and not trying to be them, but trying to adopt the behaviors that have made them successful.
Mm. Oh, excellent. That's so important. That distinction. Here's another piece of $100,000 advice that Alan's given, or really, it's just listening to them. You said that people pay you $100,000 or more just to listen, to have that sounding board, and it's lonely at the top, as yourself and Marshall have identified. Um, can you talk about that? Why it's so important? Why people pay you to listen?
Well, it happens very, very frequently. And when it first started happening, I was a little bit dismayed in that I'm just sitting here listening. But um, I'll tell you another quick story because it's so apt. There was a British visitor to the Middle East in the 1800s, and as he was being taken around on a Saturday morning, he noticed this long serpentine line, many blocks long, leading into a building. And he said to his guide, what is that? And he said, they're petitioners to see the Caliph. He said, the Caliph hears petitions on Saturday morning from individuals? He said, oh, yeah. And he said, how does he handle all these? What does he do? Does he have an army of people to take care of them? He says, no, he just listens. These people just want to have their story heard. And to me, even for an apocryphal story, that's something that hits me right between the eyes, because a lot of times I've realized I'm just allowing people to have their story heard, and that's enough.
Mm. Warren Buffett talked about how Charlie Munger really helped him organize his thoughts. Just by listening, and I think it's really important for us to have someone who will help us organize our thoughts professionally, just by speaking them out loud and then occasionally getting the feedback they need. Now, these last two $100,000 piece of advice, how do we apply? How do we all apply this? Well, number one, have the courage to give that candid feedback. Okay, feedback is a gift, as yourself and many other great coaches have said, and also. Gannon Baker, a good friend of mine, one of the top basketball trainers in the world, trained Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and 24 Hall of Fame basketball players. He says that your presence is a present, meaning your presence is a gift. It's actually a gift you're giving to others by being that expert listener and just sitting there and listen. It's such an important skill set, as well as, again, add being that having the courage to give the candid feedback. I think it just makes you really great in relationships in general, correct?
Well, I think having empathy is a very, very important attitude to have, and it's important. That is a contribution, as opposed to sympathy, when you're just feeling sorry for someone. But empathy says, I'm feeling what you're feeling. I talked about the three parts before. And so let's see what we can do together. Tell me more.
Mm.
And I think that's extremely important. And I think that, uh, the ability to allow people to express their feelings, and also the ability, which you alluded to help them express their feelings in a concise manner so that people can immediately understand them. Because the longer things go on, sometimes it's harder to understand, where do we start this? Uh, that's really important because behaviors don't change. So if you're verbose with your friends, you're going to be verbose in a business meeting. If you're concise and brief with your friends, you'll be concise and brief in a business meeting. Now, when you're with your family and you're kidding around, who cares? But uh, a lot of habits remain with us. Uh, I think there are four real keys to success interpersonally. One is to listen with discernment. A second is to speak with expression. A third is to write with influence. And a fourth is to read with comprehension. And if we take, especially the language, which just been talking about, words are our tools. And so the larger vocabulary you have, the better metaphors you have, the more powerful you are communicating with people. And so I said before, you have to know what's not there in addition to what is there. So when you say to somebody, you told me you had four kids, but you've never mentioned four. You only mentioned three. Why is that? That might just get you something that's important to understand about who they are and perhaps what's troubling them.
Mm. Alan, we can finish up with three rules you live by, which I love.
With
These
three,
three rules that you live by. Rule number one you shared was first, do no harm. Number two is you have to make a contribution every day in terms of wealth and happiness. And then number three, the Christian principle of tolerance and forgiveness. So, can you talk about the first one here? First, do no harm. Rule number one.
well, I said earlier, that's what the doctors practice. And, in other words, don't make the patient worse than he or she is. But I think it has to go beyond that. So you say, okay, I'm going to do no harm here because I'm not going to express a quick solution. I'm not going to take a side. I'm not going to get in the political machinations of this organization. But then you have to go beyond that and say, okay, second, I have to leave them better off than they are now. So I think that's the key there. And I think too many people in consulting and coaching and so forth are just thinking of money. They're just thinking of what they can earn and how they can pay the bills and so forth. And so you can do some harm that way because you'll take on projects you shouldn't. Um, I think that nobody should think about raising their fees unless they think about raising their value.
Mm. Oh, excellent. Can you talk about we have no right to consume wealth or happiness unless we create it? That was rule number
Ah,
two.
yeah. Well, people talk about takers and givers, right? Uh, and I think, I mean, I'm a capitalist and I'm an opportunist. And so I think that you deserve to be paid for value you bring to others. But I think you have to contribute back if you're doing well and doing better than others. So, I'm philanthropic. Uh, I never, not just financially, I mean, I never have a workshop without someone in there who's there on scholarship.
Mm.
Nobody knows who it is. And I won't do it when someone asks me for it, but I know I can choose people I know need it. So it's fine to consume wealth, that is spend money, and it's fine to consume happiness, that is enjoy yourself. But you should produce happiness for others, and you should enable others to produce wealth for themselves.
Oh, beautiful.
Final thing on your list there, basic Christian principles. You know, uh, this we're in this recording here. We're nearing Easter, and on Good Friday, so a week from today, I'm going to be reading the Passion. I'm the narrator for the Passion. So my church has a professional speaker who's one of the electors. And, Christianity is based on tolerance and forgiveness. And we can't be perfect. We're not always going to make it. We won't always be tolerant. We won't always be forgiving, but it should be something we try to do. And if we all tried to do it, no matter how imperfectly, it would be a lot better world. And there wouldn't be so much animosity and so much enmity and so much polarization and competition. And, I've lived long enough to have seen collaboration and consensus, and politicians in Washington who reached out to the other side, who arranged for win-wins and not win-lose. And I'm confident, and I hope not too starry-eyed, that we can get back to that.
Mm. Well, and where can people find you and your work? You've got a ton out there.
Well, alanweiss.com has a massive amount of free resources, audio, video, and text. Every weekday on Twitter and other platforms is a Minute with Alan video. Every Monday, also free, is the Monday Morning Memo, which I put out talking about contemporary things or things like we talked about in terms of um, um, road rage and life rage and so on. So that's Monday Morning Memo. Once a month, also free, is Balancing Act, my large newsletter. Once a month, we put up the Writing on the Wall, which is about a 5 to 10 minute video. Every Friday, there's the Friday Funnies, which are cartoons about two of my former dogs, Koufax and Buddy Beagle, which I get a lot of feedback on. Uh, and I'm all over social media. My tech team is good at repurposing my stuff and getting over social media. So all that stuff is free. And if you go to my site, you'll also find what I'm planning in terms of workshops and seminars, both remote and live. I just ran masterclass in Newport. I'll be running Beyond Success in LA in June. And Alan at summitconsulting.com, drop me a line.
Okay. Excellent. I can attest to this, and I promise you, Alan's not paying me to say this. I've actually paid him to say this. Working with Alan one-on-one was one of the best investments I've ever made. Every one of his books over-delivered. The AI, just to get access to the 60 books plus is worth the price of admission alone, let alone all the advice you're going to get at your fingertips. Now, I heard a psychologist talk about this recently. That most people have maybe six people in their life, if they're lucky, that puts their life in a much better direction, has a really positive impact. And Alan's definitely been one of those half dozen people for me, not just personally and professionally. So my challenge to everyone listening is really be intentional about finding one of those people or finding all six in your lifetime. And if you get more, great, but be intentional about seeking out people who will put your life in a much better direction. Now, the people who are currently in your life, who have put your life in a better direction, say thank you to one of them. One way, shape, or form. Send them a text message, an email, a phone call. Thank them in person, and let them know that you've put their or they've put your life in a much better direction. So, Alan, I'll end with this. Thank you for putting my life in a much better direction as well as my career. And thank you for the $100,000 advice, 10, 20 pieces. We're over a million here, maybe $2 million worth of advice. Alan, I appreciate you.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you for having me on. It's been, as always, with you, a real joy. And I wish you and all your viewers the best.
Thank you. Looking forward to the next conversation.